Welcome to day 46. Today we're looking at a fascinating kind of neural network, one that learns without needing any labels. It's called an autoencoder, and its goal is surprisingly simple: to understand data so well that it can recreate it from memory.
So think about this for a second. If you don't give a model any answers, how can it possibly learn to find the important parts of an image? How does it figure out what's signal and what's just noise, all on its own? Well, that's exactly the question we're going to answer. We're going to break down how this clever architecture teaches itself to compress data down to its essence and then build it back up, a process that forces it to discover what truly matters.
To get a real feel for this, let's start with a simple analogy. Let's imagine a team of two digital sketch artists.
Okay, so first, we start with our input. Imagine it's a really detailed, high-resolution photograph. It's full of color, texture, and all sorts of complex information.
The first artist, we'll call them the encoder, has one job. They studied that detailed photo and have to boil it down into a tiny, minimalist sketch. They have to ignore all the fluff and just capture the absolute essential lines that define the image.
This super compressed sketch is the most efficient summary possible. In machine learning, we call this condensed representation the latent space, or maybe a more intuitive name is the bottleneck. All the rich information from the original photo has to be squeezed through this tiny representation. Now, the second artist, the decoder, comes into the picture. Here's the catch. The decoder never sees the original photograph. They are only given that minimalist sketch, and from that alone, they have to try and reconstruct the original detailed photo. And right there, that's the entire objective. The whole system is trained to make that final reconstruction as identical to the original as it can be. If the decoder can create a good copy, it's proof that the encoder's sketch was a fantastic summary. Okay, that's the intuition. Now let's map our artist analogy directly onto the actual network architecture to see how this is really built.
So formally, an autoencoder is an unsupervised neural network. Sometimes people call it self-supervised because the data is effectively its own label. Its purpose is simply to encode data down to a compressed form and then decode it back to the original. Here's how the data flows through the system. The input goes into the encoder network, where the layers get progressively smaller, squeezing the information down. It hits that tightest point, the bottleneck, which holds the compressed code. Then the decoder network takes over, with layers that get progressively larger, trying to expand that code back into the original data at the output layer.
So how does this whole thing learn? It's a beautifully simple feedback loop. The network compares its output to the original input and calculates the difference. We call this the reconstruction error. The entire training process is just a constant effort to drive that error down, forcing the encoder to get better and better at making a useful summary.
Now, you might be thinking, isn't this just dimensionality reduction like PCA? And yeah, it is, but with a really important advantage. While PCA is limited to linear relationships, an autoencoder's neural network structure lets it capture complex, non-linear patterns. This makes it way more powerful for messy, real-world data like images or audio.
So now that we have the intuition and the basic architecture down, let's see where this actually becomes useful in practice. Autoencoders are incredibly versatile. For something like anomaly detection, you can train a model only on normal data. When a weird, new data point shows up, the model will have a high reconstruction error, which acts like a big red flag. Even better, that compressed code from the bottleneck can be fed into other models, giving them a powerful head start on understanding the data's structure.
And this concept gets even more powerful with variations like the variational autoencoder, or VAE. Instead of learning one single fixed sketch, a VAE learns a whole range of possible good sketches. This lets you sample from that range and have the decoder generate completely new synthetic data. It's a foundational idea in generative AI.
So, to wrap up the entire process, an autoencoder learns an efficient summary of data by first compressing it through a bottleneck and then trying to rebuild the original from that summary.
And if you remember just one thing, let it be this: the magic is the bottleneck. That constraint isn't a limitation. It's the very thing that forces the network to learn a rich, meaningful representation of the data, separating what's important from what's not.